Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the November edition of Octopus 101. I am your host, John Bristowe. Thank you for your time and attention for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This is a webinar that we run on a monthly basis, and it's meant to help those folks who are looking to basically kick the tires with Octopus for the first time. So we're going to take a very slow but measured pace through Octopus. We're going to teach you a little bit about how it is, how it works, what it is, and what you can do with it. And so, with that being said, I have a few slides here that I'd like to just kind of lay the sort of the landscape or the story around Octopus, so that there's a better understanding about how it works essentially. So first and foremost, like I said, my name's John. If you have a question about what you see in today's webinar, you can reach me at this email address. I'm more than happy to take your questions. And there's a lot of resources that we'll go through, so sometimes it can be confusing. And if you see something or you hear something in today's webinar that you're confused about, feel free to send me an email. More than happy to follow up with you. So like I said, you're going to learn a little bit about Octopus today in this webinar. So we're going to cover first, what is Octopus? How does it work? And more importantly than anything, why you should use it. One of the more confusing things about technology is understanding the why. Most people understand the what and the how, but the why is really where people make a connection with technology. And so by explaining that, my goal will be to kind of demonstrate how Octopus can help you and your teams deliver software faster and in a more robust manner. The second thing we'll talk about is what we like to call our model. You can think of this as like fundamentals. So Octopus has a model that is a way in which we describe the deployments that you are doing in your organization. So we have a lot of concepts that we need to discuss, things like projects, deployment processes, releases. Don't worry about each one of these right now. You'll learn about what those things are. But the reason why, one of the key reasons why Octopus is adopted by so many people is because we model software deployments so well. They are modeled in a way that allows people to do deployments in a very effective manner. The third thing that we'll talk about is really the core or essence of Octopus, which is a deployment process. So deployment processes are essentially a series of steps that are followed to deploy your software from a variety of places to a variety of places. So a deployment process, as I said before, it's kind of like a recipe. It's a series of steps that will be followed by workers, by agents, etc., that will do work on your behalf to deploy software from A to B. And we'll talk a little bit about how that is and how that works. And then finally, we'll wrap things up by showing you a little bit of an example of how to get a deployment going through a CI process or continuous integration process. So continuous integration, which we'll talk about in a second, is basically traditionally the process by which you test code. So you'll run a bunch of unit tests, etc., and you will integrate the build process as part of your software deployment pipeline. More recently, probably in the last 5 years or so, the CI process has been taken over with a bunch of other tasks as well. And our argument has always been that CI is not CD. That is, if you're looking to do continuous delivery, that is CD, and you're using a CI process for that purpose, you're doing it in a non-optimal way. And so we'll take a look at how you can trigger a deployment to use a tool that is made for deployments from a process or server that is around building and testing. So we'll use GitHub Actions as the example there. All right, so to set the stage essentially, I'd like to start by talking about this sort of blank canvas, right? So this is the world, but believe it or not, this is the world of software development. So on one side, you'll have your group of developers. So these are folks who are, in the trenches, battling with code, thinking about architectural decisions, caring about performance. And as a process of that, they're also thinking about things like automation. So how do we automate things like testing? How do we automate things like building? How do we also think about, going around our jobs the most effective means? But there's this problem. On the other side of the world, essentially, it might as well be on the other side of the world. You have all this infrastructure where you want to deploy your software. So some common examples include cloud providers, things like Azure, AWS, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, web servers, web servers like IaaS, application servers, there are a lot of different targets. This is the infrastructure where you run. And you'll notice that it's this kind of an apt, a metaphor here, but there's a very large valley between these two objects on the diagram here. And that's kind of a problem, right? Because developers are now tasked with, okay, how do we get our software out to this infrastructure? Now, in a one-off scenario, that's fine, right? Most people are familiar with MSIs and they just do the next finish thing and their way they go. But in the world of software development today, what happens now is that developers do this almost multiple times a day. So they're deploying updates to their software multiple times a day. This is a process by which, you think about continuous delivery, continuous deployment. You're getting into the habit now of releasing often and releasing early. This is now a bit of a challenge to use a next finish sort of process of deploying software. So there's a problem here. In addition to that, and this is kind of a saving grace here to this story, you also have a bunch of automation process pretty much already. So most organizations, thankfully, do automated builds. So automation around builds are pretty much consistently a thing you see across most teams today. So continuous integration, which is the testing side of it, isn't adopted as much, but it's still done. So people that you see in the industry typically do a lot of automated builds, a lot of automated testing, but there's a challenge here because they're utilizing, as I said before, that CI process to do deployments as well. And that's a problem because, as I said before, CI, while it does have aspects for doing deployments, so depending upon what vendor you use, depending upon the way that they model deployments, you'll see things like environments or deployments or releases, but that's about as far as they go typically for supporting those challenges. And that's where Octopus Deploy comes in. So Octopus Deploy is a solution that either you can install on your own infrastructure or we can host it for you in the cloud. We have a solution for that. And Octopus Deploy basically helps solve that problem of getting deployments done right and in a robust manner. So we think of Octopus Deploy as the sort of glue between these two worlds. So if you have a set of processes where you're doing a lot of automation and you're concerned about how you go about doing deployments, this is where Octopus Deploy can help. So let's jump into a demo and see how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up Google Chrome and we'll take a look at how Octopus works. All right, cool. So this is octopus.com. This is our website. This is where you'll go to download a trial version. So the big green button here is where you go to get started. When you click on that button, we'll take you to a subpage which will ask you a bunch of questions. It will ask you whether or not you want to use Octopus Cloud or if you want to use Octopus Server. Cloud is the one that you have available as a SaaS solution. Server is a download. It's basically an executable that will install Octopus on a set of infrastructure that you have. So that's how you get started. And we provide a free 30-day trial as part of that. On our website, you'll find also a bunch of resources and literature around how Octopus works. We have this nice, cool graphic to kind of showcase how this world that we just described is modeled. But essentially, this is the world in which we live. So what I'd like to do is present to you the Octopus UI. The Octopus UI is the dashboard that you can use, and this is what represents Octopus to manage all kinds of things. You can manage things like projects, you can manage deployments, you can see the status of your deployments, etc. And so the first page you're going to come to is a page that looks like this. This is the dashboard, essentially. So this is your one-stop shop for seeing where your deployments have conducted, how they've conducted, etc. On the left-hand side here, we have this drop-down list. This is called a space. And so what spaces are is they are a isolation boundary. So oftentimes you'll have a lot of teams and a lot of projects on the go, and you want to isolate those from each other. You can do so using the concept of a space. So let's go ahead and create a new space, and we'll call it Octopus 101. And you can see I have a lot of test data in here. That's okay. I'm going to make myself a space manager for this. There's a bunch of other things in here, but you don't need to worry about that. Basically, I'm creating a new space. This is an isolation context, and I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Now, when I do that, I can then jump over to Octopus 101, and I have my blank environment. So this is my blank environment. This is an empty space. It doesn't contain anything, and this is the environment. This is a similar sort of situation you'll see when starting Octopus for the first time. Now, we've done some great work here to make it easier for you to get up and running. So we have some very nice sort of guided tours, as well as videos that accompany them for you to get started with these things. So let's go ahead and go through this process. So I'll just call this Hello Octopus for my project name. You'll notice that we also have the option here to set version control for this project. What does that mean? So everything that we're doing here is written to a database. That database, and this is more information you need to know, but it helps describe the story. So that database is SQL Server. We use SQL Server for basically persisting all the values that you're persisting here. But you also have the other option of writing those values to a version control system. That's what VCS means, version control. And so version control is really effective for if you're utilizing or describing these projects and you want to use something like Git or other control provider to persist those settings. The reason why that's valuable is because once they're in a text format, you can edit them outside of the UI if you so wish. They also get the benefit of, having control checks and all kinds of things that go along with VCS as well. If I show the advanced options, you'll notice there's some other things here. These are concepts that you don't need to worry about for now, but that's why we hide them. But if you want to provide a description in Markdown, you can. If you want to define a certain project group, you can do that as well as what's called a life cycle. We'll talk about these concepts in other videos, but in this webinar, we're not going to cover them. They're just basically aspects of our model, which I described earlier. So I'll go ahead and click on Save. Now, what it's going to ask me is you need to set up an environment to deploy to. So this is really the sort of where Octopus starts to expose its model. So these environments are not physical environments. They're not places you have to set up in your QA lab. They are nothing more but symbolic. They are metaphorical environments. So you can give them any names you want, but we use these as part of a model to describe how and where and when you deploy to. So the common environments that you'll typically see in most environments, sorry, I should use another term. In most organizations, most folks have the definition of development, staging, and production. Some folks have, things like QA, other things like that, but these are the ones that we provide. You can name these anything you want, and you don't have to set these up initially if you don't want to. It's up to you. So I'll save that. And now you'll notice, if you notice here, we've established a few things. So we've established a project. We've called it Hello Octopus. We have a default what's called project group. So projects have groupings, and that's kind of like a way in which you can think about how your projects relate to each other. This is our project here, Hello Octopus. I have an icon associated with that or logo. I can change that if I want. So let's say if I have a website that I'm building, I can change this to the logo of the website. On the left-hand side here, I have a bunch of options here. We'll talk about these in a sec. Up at the top, I have my project status. So you can see I've created my project. I've created my environments. The next thing is to create a deployment process, which we'll talk about, and then to do a release and deployment as part of that. So here in this middle part, you'll notice it's blank, and that's because we haven't created a deployment process. This is basically the series of steps that Octopus will follow in order to do a deployment. So let's go ahead and create one. For completeness, I can show you. We do have two examples here. These are very contrived, high-level examples showing you how you can create these. And these are based on 2 of 5 languages we support, so PowerShell and Bash. But I'm feeling adventurous, so let's go ahead and create a process from scratch. So the first thing you'll see when you click on that button is you'll see a categorization of steps. These are all the steps that Octopus supports out of the box and through community involvement to define a deployment process. So what is a step? A step is an action, or rather it's an execution that will occur as part of an overall deployment. So if you think about a deployment today, let's say you're deploying to a web server. There's a variety of steps you may have to do before a deployment. You may have to provision an application. Let's say we're targeting IIS, Internet and Information Service, the Microsoft's web service application platform. I may have to set up an application pool. I may have to set up an application. I may have to set up a vRoot, a virtual root. I may have to set up the directory where that vRoot is pointing to. I may want to set up some security parameters, and that's just for IIS. Now, after that, I may want to set up a database, or I may want to provision some infrastructure. These and other sorts of steps you can conceptualize of the series of things you have to do to get a deployment. conducted. And that's what steps represent. Steps are basically a series of operations that you will conduct in one or many environments to do a deployment. So if I just show you some of the examples here, so you can see we have a variety of what are called script steps. These are steps that basically follow tasks or integrate a CLI as part of it. It's our most basic but also most popular option. Looking at other options here, like the one I described, deploying to IS, this is a built-in process that we have support for. So let's just click on that one just for illustrative purposes. So when you click on that option, you'll notice that in the left-hand well here, we have this listed as step 1, deploy to IS. And on the right or middle part here, you'll notice that we're defining our deployment process. So there's where we're actually going about the process of defining all the various things that we need to do to get a deployment to IS. You'll notice there's lots and lots of options specified here. That's intentional, right? Deploying to IS is not an easy thing. It's a lot of moving parts and pieces. And so we'll talk about what these things are as we go through them. But I'm not going to go ahead and deploy to IS just yet because I don't want to deploy to IS. I want to make it a little bit simpler. So I'm going to choose a simpler option, which is run a script. So run a script is pretty much what you think it is. All it is taking a script that you define and executing it. So you give it a name. This is just for your purposes. This isn't the name of the script somewhere else. This isn't only relevant to you. So this is the step name we'll call run a script. You can add a series of markdown notes as well. So these are the notes, for example. Then down here in the script section, you'll notice that I have a variety of options. So first it asks, Octopus is asking, like, where is the script defined? Well, I can define it as an inline script that Octopus knows about. I can define it as a Git repository. So I can go to a Git repository and say, hey, go find your script over there. Or I can define it as part of what's called a package. Now, a package is what we call basically like a file. So if you provide us with a file like a zip archive or something to that effect, we can use that as a package and we can unpack it, find the resource we're looking for inside that you denote as your script, and we can run that. This is really effective if you want to do deployments of scripts in this way, or you want to find them in locations. And there's a variety of options for here. So we're going to get into the weeds if we define what that is. So we'll skip that. We'll just define it as an inline script. So you'll notice here I have a number of options. This is just for script steps, by the way. So we have over 500 steps, well over 500 community steps, and we have many other tens of and hundreds of other steps as well. And so you can see there's lots of options here. But for running a script step, we have a variety of language support. So you can run these using the PowerShell interpreter, the Bash interpreter, C#, F#, and Python. So these are the options you have for writing these. I'll go ahead and say write host, and I'll say hello Octopus 101. You'll notice that we have IntelliSense as part of this process, and there's a variety of other things that you can do as well. So without getting too much into the weeds, the other thing that I can do is I can inject what are called variables. So variables are a very simple but very powerful aspect of Octopus Deploy. They allow you to define adjustable values that you wish to use as part of your deployment process. You may wonder, why would I want to do that? Well, sometimes things can change during the deployment process. You may stand up environments that you don't know the name of in advance, and you need to reference those after the fact. That's one example of where variables come in. Variables are also useful for looking up system values as well. So you notice that we have a number of system values built in. So these are values that you may want to reference. So let's say, for example, I want to reference a value that allows me to see, that previous step in this deployment, did it succeed or not? What was the name of that? Those are exposed as values, and you can use those as part of the process. So these and other aspects of the script step is exposed to you, and you can do a variety of operations as part of this. Coming down here to the execution location, this is again part of our model. We denote a variety of things that allow you to expose where these things run. So Octopus has the ability to run these things on targets. This is where you'll install some agent software, and you can say, I'm using this as a delegate for running deployments. Or you can use what's called an inbuilt worker. So workers are what they sound like. They're basically there to execute scripts. And we actually, when you sign up for Octopus Cloud, for example, we provide a worker that you can use called Hosted Windows. We also have one for Ubuntu if you wish. but this is the worker that I'm going to use as part of this execution. These and other steps you can define. We have a series of common conditions. Excuse me one sec. All right. You know this is live when I have to sneeze. So we have a variety of conditions we can also define. Conditions are really useful when defining a step in conjunction with other steps. So I can say only run this when it is run with other steps and those steps are successful, or if they failed. These and other criteria you can specify, and we'll talk about how those things work after the demo. So we'll go ahead and save the results for this. And if we jump back up here to our deployment process, you'll notice that we now have our run a script step. So run a script is basically the way in which we define our deployment. It's going to go ahead and, just to review, it's going to run this script, and the script itself is going to just basically write out to our console, hello, Octopus 101. That's all it's doing. So let's go back to our process, and now you'll notice here that you have a check mark against the deployment process. We can now go ahead and conduct a release. So the first question it's going to ask us is, what version is this release? So you can give it a variety of values here. We support things like incremental wildcards, for example. You can do semantic versioning. This is really, really popular, especially if you're wanting to communicate versioning as part of your release process. You can also give it a series of release notes as well. Now, it's important to note that when you create a release, you're not deploying anything. What you're really doing is you're creating what's called a snapshot. Why is this important? Or what is a snapshot and why is it important? A snapshot is a saved state of your deployment process with all the values, with everything that you've defined as part of that process and persisted as a snapshot that you can run again and again. The reason why this is valuable is because when it comes to deployments, you want to make sure that those things, those values that you use, such as variables, which I showed you earlier, don't change. And the reason why that's important is because you want deployments to be consistent. This is why you use a tool like Octopus Deploy, because if you use another tool that doesn't have this concept of snapshotting, what can happen, and this happens a lot, if you go from, say, version 1 to version 2 of a release and you don't snapshot values, and then those values change dynamically over time, your releases can break. So the whole reason why we do a versioning of a release and we create a snapshot of that release is so that you can then promote that release to other environments, and you can do so in a consistent way. Those releases won't change because all the values have been saved in a snapshot. That's why we create a release. So if we save this release, we've created a release called 001. And you'll notice here that we have a variety of options here. Now, don't worry about all these options. It's not super important that you know what these things are, but this is a summary page of everything that you defined as part of the release, along with things like the packages. So for example, if you're deploying to, let's use that common example I cited earlier. Let's say you're deploying to a website, and as part of that website, you have files, right? You have a HTML page as a bare minimum. Well, those have to fall within a package. A package is like an archive that you use to house all your files. So we have to get those files from A to B, from Octopus to your website or your web server. So that will be denoted inside a package. This is where all those files will go. You may want to denote things like get resources, variables as well. We will snapshot those. Any artifacts that you have, deployment history. These are all concepts that you'll learn as you start to use Octopus more and more. Let's go ahead and deploy our release. So again, reminding you, we haven't deployed anything, but I want to show you what a deployment actually looks like. So Octopus now has all the information it needs. And just to recap, this is what we've done. We've created a space, we've created a project, we've created a deployment process, we've created a release. Now we're ready to deploy it. So the deployment is where the rubber hits the road. So it knows I'm going to deploy this to a set of environments. Remember those environments I specified earlier, so I can specify a variety of environments if I wanted. And those were part of the process of defining those things. It will also ask you, okay, when do you want to deploy this thing? Now or later? I can specify those values as part of this deployment. I can also, if I so choose, come along and say, you know what? This is a special type of deployment. I'm going to exclude a step or two as part of that process. Now, I'm not going to obviously do that here because I only have one, but that's something you can do as well. You can also define what's called a failure mode. So guided failure mode is a process by which asking the user, what do you want us to do if a deployment fails? And let's face it, deployments can fail. So this is something that is built into Octopus, and this is part of why Octopus is so robust when doing deployments, because we care about not just the golden path, but also the exceptional cases that arise along the way. And so you can basically tell Octopus to pause a deployment if you wish as part of guided failure mode. And you can define a variety of options as well. Let's just go ahead and deploy this and let's see what happens. So when we do our deployment, Octopus is now off and running and following the series of steps that we defined as part of our deployment process. So just to recap, we defined a script step that basically outputs something to the console, and we get a running summary here of that deployment running. It's using a snapshotted version of our deployment process, which is called a release. Again, remember the model. The release itself defines all of the values that are snapshotted, things like variables, packages, whatnot, and it's using those in concert as part of an execution. When it's done, it will then give you this congratulations, you've executed your deployment successfully, etc. There's just a warning here about the worker pool that we're using, which is hosted workers. It's being deprecated and will be removed on January 9th next year. So you have some time, but just wanted to just show you what this looks like. So when you do a deployment, we generate for you a running log. That running log will give you basically like a console output of everything that occurred during your deployment. So you can see all kinds of things here. You can also filter those values if I wanted. You can filter out for various log levels, etc. You can see everything that's happening as part of this process if you wish. And you can change those values as well. These are really, really useful when debugging deployments. And again, this is part of the reason why you use a tool like Octopus, because we want to expose all of those values to you. But essentially what's happened is we've gone about doing this deployment and we've deployed it to our deployment environment, or development environment, excuse me. Jumping back to our dashboard, you can now see that this deployment has successfully completed for the development environment. And at this stage, I can now, say, yeah, let's go ahead and deploy something to staging. Now, the reason why the production is marked out, is because typically you want to do this in a staged approach. Now, you can obviously directly promote or deploy to environments, but we try and follow this chain of deployments as part of this process. This is how you define these things as part of environments. But essentially, that's, in a nutshell, what Octopus looks like from a UI perspective. So, jumping back to our slides, what you saw, a variety of things, and we can take a look at examples as part of this, but here's another example of a deployment process that's defined elsewhere. So we provide, as part of the deployment process, a visual representation of that process, and includes all kinds of things like steps, conditions. You can have steps run concurrently. You can have child steps. You can have like branching, more or less, as part of a deployment. There's lots of things that you can do there. You can have integrated markdown notes as part of the process, so that other folks in your organization who want to come about and see, what does this step mean, or are there any special notes that I need to be aware of when doing this deployment step. You can also do parallel step execution, as I mentioned earlier, so you can have steps run parallel or concurrently, and that's denoted by that equal sign that you see in that label. We also have labels for environments, so you can see where these deployments are running. And so to give you another example, let's take a look at an example using Octopus with a CI process. So the CI process that I care about is, sorry about that. I'll just move that out of the way. So the CI process that I care about is, let's jump over to our examples here. So this is a organization we have up on GitHub, and this is used for defining a bunch of sample applications that we have. So you'll find them listed here. There's just a ton of examples that we have, and these are really useful for examples where you're wanting to see things in conjunction with other systems. So here's a typical example where we're utilizing a bunch of processes, and in fact, I'll show you the related process as part of this, but this is a typical sort of project you'll see in GitHub. So GitHub defines a hidden folder, and inside there is where we have what's called GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is basically a marketing term. It is essentially the way in which it describes how workflows run inside of GitHub. And you can find out more by just searching for GitHub Actions. You'll see a page that looks like this. And so this is a description of how GitHub Actions work. This is basically the series of workflows that you run against code in GitHub. Now, GitHub being probably the world's most popular source control repository for teams, etc. This is how they do it. Various different platforms call it various different things. GitLab calls it CI/CD components. You can use Azure DevOps. You can use TeamCity. These all have the same concept of a workflow. It's a series of steps that are run against code. Now, as I said before, CI is great, but it doesn't do a great job of deployments, and that's where Octopus can come in. So you can use Octopus with GitHub, and you can use the two together in concert to do a really powerful pipeline. Let me show you how this works. GitHub Actions are defined in YAML. It's just simply a textual format for describing these things, and we define a series of steps as part of this CI process. Now, where things get interesting is down here where we want to do a deployment. So down here, we're doing a variety of operations like, uploading artifacts to Octopus, or push package to Octopus. These are steps that will allow you to send packages to Octopus or kick off deployments. These and other steps are defined as part of the GitHub marketplace. So the marketplace is where you find a variety of actions that integrate with GitHub, and we have a bunch that you'll find there. So GitHub Marketplace is great because it provides you a means of seeing community actions. There's a whole bunch of actions available on the marketplace today. So if I take a look here and I see, show me all the actions, there's over 20,000 actions that you can use as part of GitHub Actions. So there's lots available to you there. And as I said before, if you search for Octopus, you'll find the ones that we support. So what are these ones? These are things like run a runbook. We haven't talked about runbooks, but runbooks are basically used for operations, and it's again a series of steps that you want to execute for maintenance, for emergencies, etc. You can use our CLI or command line interface. This is a tiny executable that you can run on command line that will allow you to perform steps in Octopus. You can create releases, you can deploy releases. These and other sort of steps you can use in concert with GitHub Actions to do some really, really powerful CI processes. So in the example that I cited earlier, that's what we're doing inside of our YAML file. So our YAML file is defining the series of steps I want to do as part of the code, and I can do a variety of things here. Like typically you'll see things like build, test, and then do something else. So our build and our test will be somewhere in this file. We're not going to worry about that. But once that, well, you can actually see it here. It says build website. So we're using this. This is based on .NET. So it's saying .NET publish. That's where it's creating actually our output, which is typically a NuGet package. And then it's packaging up the website itself. Then when it has all that, it has the website, it has the database. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to start pushing values or packages to Octopus. It's going to upload a package to Octopus, which is the NuGet package. It's going to then do some other operations as well. We have this concept called build info. We're not going to talk about that here. And then it's going to create a release and it's going to deploy a release. And these two steps are how we actually trigger operations to run within Octopus. So that's essentially what we're doing here is we're basically telling Octopus from GitHub, go perform this step, go perform X step 1, go perform step 2. And that's essentially how we kick things off. And again, those are exposed to our integration with the marketplace. So really interesting stuff, like lots of stuff to take a look at there. If we want to see how this works in concert with the app that we're looking at, we can see that here. I'll just pull this up on a separate window. So we have in addition to the samples repositories that we have, so these are our sample applications that we expose that customers can use as examples. We also have an Octopus Deploy instance that you can see, and I'll bring that up here. So the example I was showing you, it was for a project we have for a integration with a product called Flyway. It allows you to manage databases. That's the most basic description for it. But if we take a look at the deployment process that maps to what I showed you earlier. So this project here, this GitHub action, it's talking to this deployment process. So this deployment process is doing a variety of steps, and this is definitely not a complex example. This is actually a simple example based on what customers typically have. Most customers have anywhere from say 20 to 50 to 100 steps as part of a deployment process. But you can see the things that are happening here. So you can see so this project is using two things. It's using a database and it's using a website. And you can see it's doing a variety of things along the way. So it's configuring database servers. It's doing a dry run. So it's checking to see, hey, is the database going to deploy? Okay. It also has a series of other steps. So things like notify DBAs of pending changes. So what this is called a manual intervention, or Slack intervention. Sorry, Slack integration and manual intervention. So you notice that these two steps run in parallel. So here we're running a script to notify DBAs that changes are happening to the database, and we're doing that through Slack, thus denoted by this symbol. In addition to that, we're also using what's called a manual intervention. What happens here is Octopus will pause its execution and wait for a human to come along and say, yep, that looks good. So this is where you start to see kind of the power of Octopus underneath, where you can perform operations like this. And again, it's part of those series of steps that I defined earlier. So jumping back to our process here, when you go and add steps to your deployment process, all the ones that I showed you here, these are all part of that set of processes that you can use, or steps rather, that you can use. So I can do a variety of operations here. And in addition to the ones that we have built in, so script steps, package steps, GCP, AWS, Azure, etc., we also have over 500 community steps that you can see that support a variety of different platforms to use in a deployment process. So these and other steps you can certainly use if you're so inclined. So I can, queue up jobs in Jenkins. I can run executions of other things as well. So jumping back to our example here, this is essentially what we're doing. We're using a community step to notify DBAs on Slack, hey, changes are coming to the database. We're then pausing execution of the deployment through a manual intervention saying, hey, you gotta validate these. And then we're continuing upon approval. We're then continuing our deployment process after the fact. So that's essentially how these things kick off. So jumping back to our example in GitHub, when we go about creating things like this, this is where these actions are conducted. So this step here in GitHub Actions is telling Octopus, go create a release, go create that snapshot I showed you earlier, and persist all the values, the packages, the variables, etc., and use that effectively as part of the deployment. And then we're telling Octopus, go ahead and deploy that release. So we're kicking off values or actions via GitHub, via the CI process, to Octopus to do its work. And essentially, that's how these two worlds kind of come together. So when I talked a little bit about how these things work in the context of a CI process, that's where basically the rubber hits the road, as I said before. So where continuous integration integrates with Octopus Deploy is through integrations like integrations with GitHub Actions, integrations with TeamCity, Azure DevOps, GitLab, etc. So we have a variety of integrations that you can use to have your CI process talk to Octopus as part of its deployment process. Excellent. So lots and lots of stuff to cover there. But again, it's part of that process. And as you've seen before, you've done a deployment as part of this scenario. So we've talked a little bit about this. And that's our demo, slide for GitHub Actions. So just wrapping up here, in this webinar, you've learned a lot, I hope. And I hope that you're a little bit more comfortable talking a little bit about Octopus and understanding how it works and why you need a solution like Octopus for your deployments. So in addition to that, we covered also the fundamentals that you need to know when you're getting started with Octopus. So things like projects, deployment processes, you saw spaces, you saw environments. We talked a little bit about deployment processes and releases. You also learned how to create those deployment processes through a series of steps. So steps are, again, those tasks that you want to execute as part of a deployment. And those tasks have a variety of options and attributes and properties associated with them. You can control them. You can have them run in parallel. Lots of options available for you. And then finally, through the integration with GitHub Actions, you can see how you can trigger a deployment through a CI process and have a full pipeline utilizing a strong and robust tool for doing CD or continuous delivery to a variety of locations or targets. Great. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. I know that it was a bit of a whirlwind here, talking a little bit about what Octopus is. If you want to find out more and you want to continue your journey, you can visit our website at octopus.com. We also have a YouTube channel that you can check out. We have tons of videos there. We post at least weekly. And you'll find a ton of videos there showing you pretty much the same things that I was showing you here, a lot of the basics, but also more of the advanced scenarios as well. So we have a bunch of videos where we talk about new features that have come along. We talk about a variety of different environments if you're interested in deploying to Kubernetes, or you're interested in, what are the innovations that we've done around steps, these and other videos you'll find on our YouTube channel. So feel free to reach out and let us know if you are missing anything. And if you need to contact me, you can reach me at my email address there. And yeah, so there's lots of stuff for you to check out. Again, you can kick the tires yourself by visiting octopus.com, and you'll find a lot of great resources there, in addition to our YouTube channel and everything else in between. So thank you again for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your journey, learning a little bit more about Octopus. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate you taking obviously that time to learn about Octopus. And we'll see you next month on the next Octopus 101. Take care.